right, should we go to the real estate side?
Let's go to the real estate side.
All right. So we threatened to talk about solar before.
Yes, as we're sitting in a beautiful sunny day in Arizona.
Yes, you can see the sun shining out there. And I think it's time that we talk through solar a little bit. Now, this is not a conversation of the value of solar environmentally. This is a conversation of the value of solar dollars and the dollars that you will get for your house when you go to sell and what appraisers can value that solar on.
So let me translate just a little bit. This is the truth behind what you might hear from a solar salesperson. So that's why we're presenting this data. Yeah.
So I think the first and probably biggest thing that you need to be aware of and kind of differentiate as we go through this is owned solar versus leased or loaned solar, because they get treated differently, particularly when we go and talk about how does an appraiser look at this. So if it's leased or loaned, an appraiser cannot give any value to that solar. Zero. This is coming from Fannie Mae. They are not allowing their appraisers to put a value on the fact that the home has solar. Basically, they don't care if it saves the homeowner money 15 years, in the future. They care about if that house goes into foreclosure and they have to go sell it, what value are they getting for it right now?
And that loan is a liability.
Yes, leased and loan, no value. Owned, it might not. That's a little bit more complicated. But leased, loaned, no value. And I think something before we move on to talk about here is if you're looking into solar, be certain that you're really reading these contracts. We've seen some interesting contracts come across our plate before with, major price increases a certain number of years in. What started as, say, a $130 payment when the solar was installed, by the time that lease or loan ends, it's, $300. And so you've got to balance out, in 20 years when this lease or loan is coming to an end, is it still going to be worth that payment that I'm making every month? Not just in summer when I'm actually using a lot of electricity, but in the winter also, especially if you're running off of gas. At least here. I guess in other parts of the country that might be flipped, but
True.
That idea. So is it down the road going to be still worthwhile to make that happen?
Yeah, we were working with a client and they were looking at a house that had leased solar on it, and by the end of the contract, it was like $369 a month, which is nearly double my high point in the summer electricity bill. And it's like, what's the point of that? It might have been a bigger home, might have had a second story, but even at that, and that assumes that you're recovering 100% of your electricity bill, which not all solar installations do.
Right. So really look into that. Consider, is this something that you are going to, be in this house for the next 20 years and you will benefit? Because then when you go to sell, you have to look at this from the perspective of the next buyer. And if they are in a house where their top bill is $150 in the summer, and they're looking at a solar bill that's going to be $300, that's going to turn a lot of buyers off. And we are seeing that more and more in the market now, that non-owned solar homes are sitting. And they seem to be sitting quite a bit longer than other homes.
Or what we're seeing, if it's a loan, not a lease, we'll see owner will pay off loan at closing.
Yes.
To remove that whole situation from the equation.
Yes. Which could be $30,000 that you are giving up to pay that off at the end of...
Right. So you're paying off something basically for the new owner that you're not going to get the benefit of. So again, if you're going to be in the home, you're going to be in the home for 20, 25 years. I don't know how many of us can predict that.
Right. And I think that's the challenge here when you're talking about financing something for that long. And I also think about it in the sense of, if you're doing a remodel in your home, right? You're doing a new kitchen. You're paying that off before you go to put it on the market. Solar is like the only thing that people are financing and then expecting the next owner to pick up continuing financing on that. We don't do any other work on a property that we, as the current homeowner, thought was in our best interest to do, and then expect the next person to keep paying for it.
Correct.
But for whatever reason, solar sales people have been really good, and they have convinced people that this is something that people will want to keep paying, even though they did not choose to install it.
Right. So now if there's a solar company out there that has a different plan or a different, we'd love to hear it, but that's not what we're seeing.
Yeah. And then there was this big boom of solar a few years back, at least in our market. And now we're seeing the other side of this, of these solar companies going out of business. So then what happens if the solar that you put on your roof that is warranted and all of that with a certain company is no longer there? So we're finding, again, difficulty of transferring solar when a company's gone bankrupt and basically sold their leases or loans to someone else.
Right.
Tracking down that company to get the transfer paperwork. Do they now allow that because that's a different servicer than the original company? Does that warranty carry over? Most likely, probably not. So then we're having that challenge of, now you have something on your roof that you're paying for that you don't have a warranty for anymore because the original installer went out of business.
Well, and then take that a step further, the roofers these days will not touch solar on the roof. And so if the home needs to be re-roofed or repaired, they will not remove the solar because of the liability issues.
Yeah, they don't want the warranty issues.
And so if you can't find somebody that's willing to take on that, and your original company has gone out of business, now you're kind of stuck.
Yes.
So again, these are just warnings. We're not trying to scare people. Maybe the better version of solar is the one that you put out in your backyard and it's not on your roof.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. If you're talking about, 20-year solar contract, and most of our roofs are going to be in that place where they need to be repaired or replaced in 20 years or less, just because of the sun and the heat here, then you're paying for someone to come take them off and put them back on. And that can be expensive. Depending on the number of panels you have, it's typically charged as a per panel rate. And I've seen people quoted thousands of dollars just to have their panels taken off and put back on.
Right. Now, there is at least one company that I've heard of that when they come to do a solar install, they'll re-roof your house also. So the concept is the roof and the solar should age together. Yeah. And so when it comes time to re-roof, that's also the time to re-solar or just take the solar off. It's reached the end of its useful life. But again, that's one company that I've heard of that does that.
Yeah. And then on to kind of the idea of owned solar. So do you get value for owned solar? The answer is maybe. So we just had a chance to sit down with an appraiser here a couple weeks ago. And of course, the topic of solar came up. And what she told us was that let me see my notes here. There has to be another comp that they are using for that property that has solar. So if you're the only home in the neighborhood that's put on solar and none of the others have solar that they're comping with, zero value because there's nothing to compare to. So at least one of your comps has to have solar. And then basically they need to go look at that comp versus the others and see if having solar on that house added value to it versus,
made a difference.
Versus the others. And then if it did, then they can adjust for solar if it's owned on your property. What this appraiser said, in their company, she said, does typically 2 to 5 appraisals per day. They have never adjusted for solar.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's telling you that it's either not making a difference or it's making such a small difference that it's really not noticeable. So something to consider when you have a solar salesperson knock on your door and say, hey, no matter how you get solar, it's going to give value. I don't know how to say this nicely other than they are lying to you.
Yeah. So then it actually makes the math simpler then, because you're not going to try to build in some kind of home value appreciation. You're just going to look at what's my monthly electricity bill on average, how much electricity is going to be generated by this solar, what is it going to cost me on a prorated basis, and is one greater than the other?
Yes.
And that makes your decision quite easy. Now, depending on where you are in the country and how your electricity is generated, you might still want to make the environmental choice of, I'd rather generate electricity from the sun than from a coal-fired plant, as an example.
Yep.
That's a different equation, and that goes into utilitarian economics and
values.
How many utils is that worth to you?
Yep.
So, you can figure that out. I had a friend that measured his utils were pizza and beer. How much pizza and beer can I buy for the value of that object that I would otherwise buy?
Yep.
So, sorry.
So, yeah, I think
John Stuart Mill just came rushing back from my college days.
Yeah, I think I read some of that.
Yeah.
In my one political philosophy class that I took, and then decided that I did not want to go the politics route.
Well, it's a very useful way to frame personal decisions by using utilitarian economics and utils.
And why people don't always make pure economic, rational decisions.
Yeah, why I buy that Cadillac instead of a Honda. Well, there's prestige utils in owning that Cadillac or Lincoln or whatever, Mercedes. It still gets you from point A to point B.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think moral of the story, if you're thinking about getting solar, just be very cautious going into it and really make sure you're reading the contract, you know what's going on with it, you know what future price increases are going to look like, you know what the warranties look like, all of those things. That way, when you potentially go to sell, you know what challenges you might have.
Yeah, and good summary. Just the other thought that I had is, when we talked about those accelerating prices over the life of the contract, some people might think, well, I'm going to sell in 10 years, and so I don't have to worry about those higher prices. Well, you do.
Yeah.
Because nobody's going to buy your house.
Yeah.
You're going to be forced to pay that anyway. So.
Something to consider if you're looking at solar.
Yes, indeed.